Right. So without any further ado, let's start with both of you. And please, floor is all yours. Kindly introduce yourselves to our participants today and then start your session.
Sure. So my name is Miranda Crowhurst. I have been an ESL teacher for over 10 years, and I even opened and co-directed my own language school in Bolivia in South America. So that got me really interested in business, and I started doing my MBA with the University of Birmingham, which is how I know Dr. James Blackmore-Wright. I also have been working for Twinkle Educational Publishing, if anyone knows their ESL teaching materials. And I've been making videos for them, a lot of videos where I pretended to be different languages, and those videos gained millions of views. So it was a really fun ride to do those videos. And now I'm actually teaching business at the University of Colorado. I'm teaching international business, strategy, and marketing as well. So I kind of live in those two worlds between ESL teaching and also business and business research. Yeah. James, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Fantastic. And yeah, good afternoon. Well, good afternoon to everybody apart from Miranda, where it is the morning. But I'm James, and I'm from the University of Birmingham. I had the pleasure to work with Miranda on her work into the strength of second language in business and entrepreneurship. I suppose my focus is on running and managing executive education programs across a number of countries at the moment, and my research area is really about the language of business and the performance, the decision making, I suppose the cohesiveness of business that comes from language and how we utilize that. So it was really interesting working on Miranda's research, and really interesting to hear from people today about the challenges around, certainly around AI and students and how we teach and how we communicate. So there's been some really fascinating insights. So thank you to everybody that's presented so far.
Yeah, I want to say let's start off with all the participants in this meeting. Thank you so much for coming along today. It means a lot to us that you're here and you're giving us your time. We really hope to make this worth your while. And we would love to hear from you and hear about your experiences here today. So please participate in this meeting as well. Thanks to Maria and all of the organizers and moderators today. And also thank you to James. You know, I graduated from my MBA program in 2022, but he's still mentoring me and supporting my career and, you know, showing up for me and giving me so much valuable advice. So I really want to say thank you to him as well. So this is brand new research that we have never shown before to anybody. It's hopefully getting published very soon, but you are the first audience for this new research. So I really hope that you like it. So let's begin by talking about this author, this playwright called Samuel Beckett. Samuel Beckett was Irish, and he was writing his plays in the first half of the 20th century. And even though his first language was English, he actually chose to write a lot of his plays in French because he believed that writing in French helped him think through his ideas more clearly. And I'd like to quote from a biography about Beckett that says, Beckett says that he began to write in French because he wanted to get away from his mother tongue. Writing in English somehow made it all come too easy. The French language offered greater clarity and forced him to think more fundamentally, to write with greater economy. So Beckett fundamentally knew what we are researching today, which is the language that you choose to think in can change how you think and can change so much about what you create as well. So I wanted to start with you by asking you, is this your experience as well? I know so many of you are, speak more than one language. You're multilingual. So I wanted to ask, please tell us in the chat or by with using your voice, please tell us, do you feel like language changes how you think? Yes, Beatrice.
Hello. I would say that yes, because language is not isolated. It's part of a culture, and you have to understand that culture. And definitely, when I speak Spanish, I speak differently from when I speak English, and I even adopt different roles. So yeah, I would agree with that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting because those are my two languages as well. I definitely feel like my sense of humor and stuff is different in Spanish. You agree?
Absolutely. And even in the same country, going from one country to the other, you have to think differently, although it is Spanish that we're speaking, but the culture is great influence on the way we speak and the way we think. And even the things we do. So, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Culture is so linked to language. It's not just about the words, it's about our associations with those words, and those are different in different cultures. Cool. Let's see. We've got NT, definitely. Speaking American English and Japanese are very different. All right, excellent. Dr. Mansour says, language has an impact. Yes, it does. I think it affects something in my brain, but I do not have enough information about it. Well, fantastic, because hopefully today we can teach you a little bit more about what that process is that's happening. Language culture changes how we think. Yes, I absolutely agree. So let's have a little dive into what we know so far. So I have to say that unfortunately, research in business was quite a long way behind what Samuel Beckett was thinking. So unfortunately, in business, in history, language has really been regarded as a barrier, a problem. When, let's say a British business had to interact with a business from Japan, they saw that as an issue. Which is, I think, very, very sad that people in the past thought it would just be easier if we all just spoke the same language. I know, James, you have some experience with that. Would you like to elaborate?
I do have some experience, and I'll say unfortunately as well. And I'm just looking at Azra's comment on, depends on how you mentioned your language is either dominant or powerful. And I think from a teaching perspective, I probably should feel a little bit guilty because looking and running MBA programs across various countries, which have had a really, I think, positive effect on business. There's some very positive outputs from MBAs, but they're delivered in English. Every single program has been delivered in English. And like you say, where there's an imposition in terms of how people think. And by trying to get, I think, students and businesses thinking a different way, we almost undervalue, I think, some of the first languages of a lot of students. And also, I think from the experiences of working directly with business, the amount of feedback that says it's a problem or a multilingual workforce, I wish everybody spoke the same language. It's so much time to invest. Perhaps one of the biggest assets that we should see in business and in education is sort of paradoxically a major problem and a major barrier. So unfortunately, I see this all the time, but I think it's definitely something that we've got an obligation to overcome at some point.
Yeah, and he's saying native speakerism is real. Yeah, and that's exactly what we have been seeing in the business world. And there are terrible consequences to that. Multilinguals have really been placed at a disadvantage when they are speaking that company's main language as their second or other language. And because of that, a lot of more multilinguals have turned to entrepreneurship outside of the company. And they found that in order to really achieve their ideas, they've had to leave and start off on their own, which from the perspective of the business is a real loss if they can't retain, if they can't keep that talent, really. It's been a shame. Azra says, because communication, for example, in English is most used and powerful. Yes, exactly. It has become, the dominant business language, but that doesn't mean that people who speak English shouldn't adapt to a multilingual environment. So there is, however, a better emerging view, which is that we don't really understand the impact that language has. But multilingualism can actually really help us. And it helps us not just because we can talk to people in different countries and grow our business like that, but also because multilingual people can perhaps make us think better as a company and help us to make better decisions. So being multilingual can be a huge advantage for the company that you're working with. And so we're seeing that companies are more open to hiring people who are multilingual or who speak that company's language as their second language, but they don't really know how to support those employees yet. So that's something that we would really, really like to help them with because it can be such a powerful tool. So how do we start investigating this? Like you were saying, I know language has an impact, but I don't really know what it is or how it works. And there hasn't been enough research done on this. And one of the main reasons is that it's really, really hard to do research on language and how it impacts our thoughts and our decisions. Being aware of your language is a bit like a fish being aware of the water that they swim in. We take it for granted every day, and we don't really consciously think about our language a lot of the time. And there's several reasons for why language is so hard to study. Number one is because it co-evolved with the human brains. The human brain and language go together, and it's impossible to have one without the other. And our language is so connected to our thoughts that sometimes it's hard to know what the difference is between a pure thought and a thought that we've put into language, if that makes sense. And researchers have argued about this. Some researchers have said that you can't have a thought without using some form of language. And other researchers have said, no, actually, it's possible that we have some thoughts without language. For example, sometimes we think in pictures, or we have, when we're dreaming, for example, it's like a kind of a movie or a film in our head. And sometimes we have a thought and we can't name our feelings, or we forget the word for a certain thing. So researchers have argued about this as well. And as you were saying, everybody's language is personal to them, depending on what culture you're associating that language with, or whether it's your first language, second language, other language. And so it's very difficult to make big what's the word I'm looking for? Big conclusions about how we use language, okay? But there are some things that we've figured out. And one thing that you might see, there's a great TED talk about this, is that languages spotlight. This is the theory of weak linguistic relativity. So basically, languages can highlight certain aspects of what's going on to us. So we used to think, for example, or some linguists believe that the limits of my language are the limits of my world, and it's impossible to have a thought that is not somehow able to be communicated in your language. And that's not quite true. But language does have an impact, and some things that are highlighted or changed a little bit by language include color, sound, our experience of time and movement and space. These things are all impacted depending on the language that we're speaking. James, do you have anything to add about linguistic relativity or those impacts?
I think just briefly, I mean, there's so many different people on this call, which is great to see from so many different places in the world. We're all looking at this presentation with very different perspectives. But if we think about business and business education, it's very similar. We've got quite a condensed world. We are dealing with marketers. There may be some marketers on the call at the moment. There might be those of us who work in brands, development, people. Actually, every aspect of business is affected by how we talk and how we think and how we see the world. And I think the acceleration of this, because of technology, and I think because of the impact that international events have on our businesses and our worlds at the moment, this sort of problem has really caught up very quickly with us. Was it such a big problem 20, 30 years ago? Perhaps not. Was it even such a big problem 5 years ago? But now I think it is becoming that issue of advantage. How do we get to have a better advantage as decision makers, as businesses, and actually closing that gap between how we think and how we sort of perform better, I think is huge. And I think that spotlight is really close now. It's about time, but I think it really does sort of bring it into perspective at the minute.
Yeah, so this is one way in which language impacts how we think. So it's the different structures of the languages that we use, but it's even more complicated than that. So from my research, this was the simplest model that I could make about how language impacts our thoughts and our actions. I won't go through the whole thing, but I just wanted to include it to show just how complicated it is. So you have this one driver, language, and then there's cognitive outcomes, thinking outcomes of that, cultural outcomes, and then all of those together lead to different social actions, so different actual decisions that we're making in the day. And then all of those things in return go back and influence language. So it's cyclical as well, an incredibly complex process. So we were left with a problem, which is how can we possibly begin to research this complex dynamic? So the first thing that we did very simply was to ask people, ask monolinguals and multilinguals how they feel about language in the workplace and how they how that impacts their day-to-day interactions in their experience. So here are some of the findings that we came up with. Number one is that multilinguals are more entrepreneurial. They are more likely to have started their own business or to have been self-employed. I would love to know if that's true for anyone in this meeting. Have you ever been self-employed or started your own business? And maybe that's linked to you being multilingual. There's more good news as well, which is 1/3 of multilinguals felt like their knowledge of languages would help them get a promotion. So companies are starting to realize that being multilingual can really, really help you in your thinking in how you are able to manage situations and manage other people as well. And obviously, these multilinguals felt very supported and felt like they were given a lot of opportunities at work. However, multilinguals were more likely to apologize for language errors and felt a kind of constant low-level anxiety. What we found was that if you're monolingual and working in a company where obviously that language is your first language, you sometimes apologize. Some languages sometimes a worry, but most of the time it isn't. But for multilinguals, it was a kind of constant low-level worry that they were experiencing. And this is because they were speaking the company's main language as their second language. And also, this was really shocking, I think, that 40% of multilinguals felt judged for their language abilities. And that, I think, could really be a feeling that could hold them back at work, and make their day-to-day working experience not so fun, let's say. So I really want to hear from you. Is this are these results things that you would say are true for you in your working environment? Let's see what people have to say. And you can speak up, or you can use the chat box as well.
Hello, Miranda. I've got another perspective for you as well. If you're a multilingual and you're like English, for example, is not my mother tongue, but sometimes people in the workplace are surprised that I speak good enough English. So that is a kind of vice versa of what you're presenting here, but that also comes across when you're not necessarily speaking the language of that country as your first language, but people are surprised that you're good at it.
Right. And how do you think that, like, how did that make you feel? How does that impact you in your working environment?
You feel this idea that you're underestimated and at the workplace, because why does whether I speak good English or not affect the quality of my work, in terms of maybe on a technical level? So it's like, okay, what the color of my skin or where I look like, where I'm from, shouldn't impact how good or bad my language skills are.
Yes, and that's, I think, exactly what we want to say. Like, this is effectively acting as a form of discrimination. And I think companies don't recognize that. I think multilinguals recognize that, but the companies don't yet. So yes, very true. I really hear you. And he says, being a multilingual can be a curse because you are given more work and responsibilities, but not given more pay. Yes, yeah, you are, overburdened. Two for the price of one. Yeah.
But I'd love to be trilingual as well, Miranda, because I understand a little bit of Arabic. So my students don't get away with whatever gossip they're doing in the class. So I think it's an extra point to have more linguals in hand than one language, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And there's more than one reason for that that we'll go on to later. So this was our first research about how multilinguals are feeling at work. And if you want to find out more about this, I think Jeff OD is a great person to follow on LinkedIn. He makes a lot of graphics about, his graphics are about Japanese and English working culture, and they really help to show the difference between what English monolinguals kind of expect from their working environments and what his Japanese colleagues think is correct in dealing with English people, and how there's a gap between those two expectations, and how both parties can learn to work better together. So very, very much recommended if you're looking for someone to follow on LinkedIn. So the second part of our study looked at how monolinguals and multilinguals think differently about investment opportunities. So do they make different entrepreneurial decisions? And I think it would be really fun if we could actually try out some of these questions together, if you would like to be part of this experiment in a small way. So let's see, I think we've got time to do questions 1, 2, 3, and 4. So could you please take a look and see what your answers are for questions 1, 2, 3, and 4? I'll give you 4 minutes for this. And what I would like you to do is, in each scenario, imagine that you have £100 or $100 if that's easier. And I would like you to split that money between two companies. So for example, in question 1, you might give £50 to one company and £50 to the other company. But if you choose to give £90 to one company, then you only have £10 to give to the other company. So have a look. Like I said, do questions 1, 2, 3, and 4, and let's see what your answers are. You can write them in the chat if you'd like. Oops, sorry, guys. Maths is hard. That's fine. You can be undecided.
Miranda, so many different responses from so many different nations. It's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. Cool. So with these questions, we actually hope to see how you respond to some different ideals. So in question 1, we actually wanted to see what you think about if you are more goal-driven, if that inspires you more, or if it's more community-driven, if that inspires you more. In question 2, we wanted to see if you were thinking in the short term or in the long-term orientation. In question 3, we were looking at your risk, how much risk you want to be involved in. And in question 4, we're actually thinking about your sense of identity. Are you thinking about your very local community, or are you thinking about a global community? So it's really, really interesting what you guys all said, because here are some of the things that we found out. So first of all, multilinguals build a very solid foundation when it comes to these decisions. So they're more likely to split, for example, long-term and short-term investments. Here's a great example of what people said. So one monolingual said, I just want all of my eggs in one basket. I don't like a complicated life. So they were not able to really think about having those two things going on at once. But the multilinguals were very happy to have those two things going on at once. They wanted to spread their investment. So this means that multilinguals, we think, take more of a balanced approach to risk and things like long-term and short-term investment. And I can see pretty much everyone here was splitting those investments. They weren't putting 100% in one company and nothing with the other company, which is actually very common with the monolinguals. James, do you have anything to add about that?
Only that I think what's really interesting about this research design is getting that sort of people to really think about how they would operate in certain situations. And I think it's a great way of sort of capturing those differences in thought processes. Some of this kind of did surprise me to begin with. That certainly multilinguals have got that more of a, I suppose, diverse thought process, that opportunity to think about risk, but balance risk as well. And that really clear distinction about how they approach different situations. So yeah, I thought it was a really, really powerful part of the study. And we don't look at that enough, I think, in businesses.
Yeah. Nice. So also we found that multilinguals gave different answers when they translated those the questions into their first language. So we didn't do this today for lack of time, but for a group that translated from English to their first language, they came up with different answers too. They were less likely to invest. They were more likely to invest in a less risky company. So they tried to avoid more risk. They were less likely to change their working hours in exchange for a small pay rise. So that kind of shows that, and they were also more likely to identify that it's better to have a 20% chance of losing $20 than a 10% chance of losing $50. So all of this shows that multilinguals who translated were able to build up a more accurate mental model of what's happening in these questions. So we thought that was really interesting because basically translating a problem will change your approach to that problem. It will slow your thought process down and really help you think through that problem clearly. And we also found that translating a problem changes who we identify with. So monolinguals, when they were asked about a local business or an international business, they chose to put most of their money in that local business because it's asked of them in English and they're thinking their kind of local sense of identity is more primed in that language. However, multilinguals, when we asked them in English, they were more likely to put their money into an international business. Perhaps when they're speaking English as their second language, that international identity is more what's in their mind at the moment. But when they translated that back into their first language, they were more likely to put their money into a local business. So that sense of identity came out. So it's just like you were saying earlier, language really helps us, changes who we think about, changes due to our cultural associations as well. And it changes who we think of as being in our in-group. So who we identify with, our sense of identity as well, which is, something so important to us is, our sense of identity as well. So that was really interesting. So I think what I would like to share with you are some of the advantages that you can use when it comes to being multilingual. I think one of the things that really shocked us was that, we said 40% of multilinguals feel judged at work. And I think if you talked to the monolinguals in the company, they would say, oh no, I don't judge people for their language use at work, and I don't want them to feel judged for their language at work. So I would really like to encourage you to know that if you are multilingual, if you're speaking the company's language as your second language, please know that you're not being judged for your language abilities. And if you are ever judged, you can send that person to us and we will put them right. Because it's such a important thing for the company that you are able to speak in different languages. And we have lots of evidence to show that. So, and know that your multilingualism is actually a superpower when it comes to entrepreneurship. You are able to access these different identities. You are able to think problems through in a different way. And that's particularly true when you are translating. So when you come across a difficult problem, or when you're worried that you are just thinking too fast, when you're thinking on autopilot and not really taking the time to really consider your options, translating is an incredibly powerful tool. And I would love it if you could all pass this on to your students as well and let them know that learning English is not just, it's not just a skill that impacts their language learning abilities. It's actually transforming their whole brain and helping them out in so many different ways, including in business. So if you have students that would like to start their own business, language learning is actually really going to help them. And businesses have a lot that, oh, sorry, James, is there anything that you would like to add to the advantages to being multilingual in business?
I think in terms of resilience as well, I think when you say there's that entrepreneurial flair that is a great advantage, I think, for most organisations. We want people to think more flexibly, more adaptably. That's the demands from recruiters. And I think as well, there's that resilience and the great things that you can do by speaking multiple languages. And I was just reflecting on the comment that was made earlier about the shock that people have sometimes that, hey, English is not your first language, but you speak it so well and you're so capable. And I think in some ways, the teaching environments that we have, I can't think of a better way to describe it than sort of linguistic racism in some respects, because we don't look at other facets of people's personalities and lives in that way. But it's made me reflect on, should we be doing more teaching in multiple languages and addressing more people in both the sort of first language, second language, and others. And that's probably a good starting point for some future research. But I think if we look at how we use it to our advantage, there are so many that's there. I think that the barrier, particularly about seeing it as a threat at an institutional level, once we break through that, then there's a significant level of competitive advantage that's there. So I think there's lots of ways that we can certainly use it to our advantage.
Yeah, and lots of things that companies can do as well. I know we're kind of going over times, but very, very quickly, I think companies need to do a lot more to help make sure that multilinguals who are speaking the company's main language as their second language feel comfortable in that environment. So they need to include the psychological safety and let their employees know that they are really valued for their language abilities and not just give them all of the extra work, as you were saying. So they need to fill in the empathy gap and actually help to bridge that gap over to their multilingual employees. And that includes things like not enforcing a monolingual working environment. It's great to hear different languages spoken at work, and helping people have different ways in which they can give their input. Sometimes if you're speaking the company's second language, it's extra intimidating to share your ideas in a meeting. So making sure that employees can share that via a chat or an email or some other way can really help as well. And also help to build that team identity together. So make sure that multilinguals know that they are absolutely included in the team, so they don't feel separate or they don't feel judged as well. Cool. So what questions do you have for us? I would love to hear some questions from you guys. Thank you so much for coming along. And yeah, we would love to know what you think.
Interesting session, Miranda. It was really thought-provoking. I think some of the inner sounds of us who are multilinguals came on surface in this research, and it's really interesting to hear all that, and very enlightening as well. So I'm happy to take any questions. If you want to speak directly to Miranda and Dr. Blackmore-Wright, you can open your mics and ask them questions. So we have one hand raised. Yes, please go ahead, Sarah. Do you want to speak to them directly?
Yeah,
Please go ahead.
thank you. I had a question. Like, they tell us when we raise children, like babies, they encourage us to speak to them in their mother tongue so they can relate to their mother language, to their country. And they would sometimes tell us speaking to them, like if they are an Arab, you have to speak to them in Arab. If you spoke to them in English, they would develop a thinking way in English, and they wouldn't be able to think in Arabic anymore unless they would learn it some other day, some other time in the future. So my question is, how true is that, and what does it look like when a child speak a language that is not his mother tongue? Like, how would he be thinking in the other language? What does it look like? Why is it sometimes considered harmful?
James?
I could probably sort of part answer that. It's a really interesting question. From a sort of child development perspective, I think the very short answer is I'm not sure, and that there is a sort of a balance of research that says that it does have some actually quite positive developmental impacts. But I think that point about how we think and what language we think in, and we can evolve. Unfortunately, I'm not one of them. The people who can think in multiple languages, and we see that as being the sort of the next expansive stage of learning second language and beyond. But what we do see when you have people who can switch and sort of recognize things, as you say, in the mother tongue, and think about that first language, move into other areas. These are the creative thinkers who do think more effectively. There's if the opportunity existed to recruit a management team and a leadership team that could think in multiple languages, that could speak multiple languages, then the advantage, I think, would be immense. And I think that would be a really positive thing. In terms of development, I think, again, it's probably outside of my scope of research, but development in business at that stage, I think it's really powerful. But there's a lot of narrative that's out there about not thinking in certain ways, and there is quite a lot of noise to cut through. So I think whether you think in Arabic and you talk in speak in English, what a great advantage. Whether you can think across both, that's wonderful. I think even Arabic itself is such an interesting area, because the complexity of the Arabic language, if you look at translating that into business decision making, for example, I would rather have a Arabic thinker, an Arabic speaker in certain environments, because on balance, what we see is that they're more adaptable, they're more flexible. There's a lot to be translated from there. I'm quite envious of anybody who could think in both those ways. In terms of child development, I'm not entirely sure, but I think in terms of business, it's a great advantage. Well, great.
If you don't mind, I would like to add to it, being a multilingual and introduced to 2 languages from childhood. At one stage, we, I think, have stopped communicating more in my language, Urdu, than I speak in English. And I think we call it Urlish when we start communicating a mixture of Urdu and English. And yes, so it's not a hazard in a way that when we are introduced to 2 languages simultaneously while growing up, but it became a better communicative aspect for us studying in an English medium school and communicating with other classmates or other things. So it was more beneficial than a hazard for us. I just want to give my 2 cents there.
Absolutely. The research showed there was a myth in the past that having that multilingual environment from a very, very young age caused problems. And the reason for that is because when a child is exposed to those 2 languages or more from very, very early on, they actually tend to start speaking later. But however, when that child does start to speak, their language abilities absolutely blossom at an incredibly fast rate. And the studies show that there are really great benefits to having that multilingual environment from very, very early on. So yeah, absolutely, speaking to kids in 2 different languages is very, very important. But I think also, your instinct will also tell you how to speak to a child. And I would never say not to listen to that instinct as well, because I think that's so it's it's maternal instinct as well is very much, and language, I think, are very much linked.
Yeah, we have Errol raising his hand. Errol, do you want to open up your mic and speak directly?
Yes, thank you
Go
very
ahead,
much.
please. Yeah, sure.
Hi, Dr. Wright. Nice to meet you. I'm working as an ESL teacher here in Japan. So could you give us some strategies that are most effective for managing classrooms with the students who speak multiple languages?
I think from sort of personal experience, very recently in dealing with this type of environment, I think the best strategy is to recognise the environment, and I think it's often overlooked. It's fantastic to have multiple languages spoken in a teaching environment. It's possibly one of the most important dynamics, maybe even more important than the impact of AI in my perspective at the moment. But we often overlook it, or if we don't do that, we might spend moments sort of acknowledging it. And I think a good strategy would be to try and understand and sort of really bring out into the open how people think, how people talk, what their perceptions are. Because I'm just looking at another question that kind of links to this. If you think about those idioms, absolutely getting your ducks in a row, that might mean absolutely nothing to most people, even on this particular call. But we can dive straight into that using these sort of colloquialisms, using these linguistic shortcuts, if we don't appreciate that environment. So I think the risk really of not acknowledging it and not making it very visible, because there might be some great opportunities that we kind of overlook in terms of how we teach and what we teach. That would be my first strategy. Try and make sure that it's really embedded as part of the process. We look at where students are from and what they say they want to learn, and we characterize students on a lot of levels, but we often, I think, institutionally, we completely miss out how they think, what language they think in, how they speak, what experiences they've got, and how that translates. That would be my top level strategy. There'll be some practicalities after that, but I think really just bringing it out into the open as an advantage.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you
to
very
celebrate, I think to celebrate different languages, you could do a really fun translating exercise where you have them translate their idioms in their language into English. For
Yeah.
example, in Spanish, you say that a cat has 7 lives. In English, it's 9 lives. In English, you say a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. But in Spanish, you say a bird in the hand is worth 100 in the sky. So I think that kind of exercise would be really, really fun for your students to like celebrate it, you know?
Or also in my case, Miranda, the idioms are absolutely different in Arabic. So
Yeah.
like apple of my eye turns out to be something else or something. It's like, okay,
Yeah, exactly.
let's figure out first what's in English, then we'll figure out what's in Arabic. So
Yeah.
I need some Arabic idioms. I think that'd be so much more powerful if I utilize those.
yeah. Great.
Yeah,
Thank you
imagine your
so much.
students' surprise.
Yeah,
Ma'am,
love
sir,
it.
I have a follow-up questions. Is it
Please.
okay?
Please go
Thank you
ahead.
very
Last
much.
one, please. Yes, yes.
Right, all right. So, because here in Japan, it is very common that in the classroom, they have different levels, right? So, what techniques can be used to ensure that all the students are engaged and challenged, regardless on their proficiency levels? Because that's very challenging for me.
If, that might take several days to answer. And I think if you talk about that sort of general challenge of what's holding back engagement, and we often see that we've got multiple ability levels. Again, I think how to sort of approach that to really assess how, even before we begin teaching sessions, what we class as capabilities. So what are those levels of engagement? How do we really want to get a strong level of engagement? What does that mean? Is that about thinking? Is that about speaking? Is that about sort of general group participation? So I think there's lots of variables to consider there. One of the approaches that I like to take for multi-ability groups is certainly multiple assessments and thinking about how we do that. So for a group at the moment of very different levels of capability and backgrounds and experience in an MBA program that I work with, we've got those 44 students. There might be, I think, 15 different types of assessment for that one particular module. Some might be a little bit more oral in the approach, some might be a little bit more visual. They have the choice of doing whichever assessment process works. We embed AI into this as well. So we almost have AI or ChatGPT or whatever tool is being used as the 43rd student that's in the group. So we allow people to utilize AI to create answers and responses, with the caveat that they have to critically assess what's being produced. So there's almost a Viva aspect that goes on top of that to fill in that gap of criticality. So that's a very quick way of probably saying that we can address the balance and the difference in capabilities through a combination of different assessments. I think being very open and clear about the use of technology, but actually how we can start to critique that, and taking a group like that as almost, in our case, 42 individual learners that are learning in a specific way, hearing in a specific way, and will be assessed in a specific way, rather than as one homogeneous group. And that does have some advantages, and we see engagement levels increase from there. I think in terms of how that works more generally, give me a bit more time, and I'll take you through how that's working with wider groups. But I think treat the individuals like individuals, recognize them, and then build modules and teaching and assessments around them seems to be the best approach.
Yeah, I think a lot of project work is the answer. So, for example, okay, today we're doing book reports, but that book report can be, such a wide variety of things depending on their level, and then providing them with different examples at different levels. So, for these 5 people over here, this is what they're aiming for. And for these other 5 people over here, this is the kind of level that they're aiming for. Or, anything like make a presentation about your family, anything that can become as advanced as they want it to be, I think is really useful.
Yes, that sounds perfect. Thank you so
Sorry
much.
about my cat as well. She's
No, it looks like very interested in your session. All excited like we are, all glued to screens listening to you. Thank you so much, Miranda. It was absolutely an honor to have Dr. Blackmore-Wright and yourself at a conference today. Interesting research, good takeaways from today's session, lots of personal, attachments to all those elements to it. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you waking up so early and joining us today. And thank you, Dr. Blackmore-Wright, on a Saturday where you need to be resting, and you're enlightening us here at the conference.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.